Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader. Today I am doing a video that I personally waited to see from my favorite booktubers all year round, so I hope you will enjoy my version of these, and these are my favorite reads of 2023. And for the first time, I think since I've started this channel, I am not gonna list them from the the least favorite one to the most favorite one. I decided to pick 12 just because that felt natural. Just pick 12 books really stood out to me this year, and I am not gonna go in any particular order. I'm just gonna mention them. I'm just gonna tell you what they were about and tell you why I particularly love them. So yeah, it's not ranked, this list. I probably, if you put a gun to my head and ask me to choose a couple, I'll be able to do it and I might mention it, but in general I don't want to really rank them, because when I looked back at them I also realized how in different genre they sit overall. I picked so many different genre for my favorite of the year, and when you compare different genre and the reason why you love the book in a genre versus a book in another genre, I found quite hard to then rank that thing, because it's different. Its scope is different, the plot of the writing might be different, and having different aims or audiences. So yeah, I decided not to rank them this year, and my shelves are a bit different behind me. I've done a small, very quick tour on my shelves, so hopefully you can, if you're interested in, you can go and watch it. Also, I am wearing this beautiful necklace that my child made for me, and I can't remove it because, yeah, she just made it very clear that I couldn't take it off. So, without further ado, let's go into my 12 favorite reads of 2023. First book that I need to mention is The Wolf Den. This was a book club pick. I am part of a book club with some of my previous colleagues from my previous company, and so this was picked and we read it at the beginning of 2023. This is part of a trilogy. I've just read the first book in the trilogy, and this is about this Greek woman who's sold into slavery and moved to Italy, where she is forced into prostitution. So you follow her trying to get out or trying to survive this situation where she used to be a noble woman, if I remember correctly, and now she is a sex worker. And you also kind of start this story a few years before the eruption of the Vesuvio. So this takes place in Pompeii, which is a very famous town in Italy, because it's of historic significance and because of the tragedy that happened where, the volcano erupted and covered people that you can still go and see today. I've been to Pompeii. It's absolutely dreadful what happened, but it's like a piece of history, and it's so fascinating just walking through Pompeii. So I believe that part of my enjoyment of this book is not only, the prose that I really enjoyed, and also following a sex worker, because she's a sex worker, and you see her, kind of navigating this new world, this new country, and trying to navigate her relationship with her pimp, and trying to make something out of her life despite her conditions. But it's also the setting, which, because I've been, I could picture very well, and, the culture at the time is so fascinating to read about. So the plot took twists and turns. I really enjoyed the writing, and I think as someone who's now read a few books from my life, a lot of the times I found them quite repetitive, and so having a protagonist perspective from someone who is a prostitute is something that I've read just a couple of times before, and it really caught my attention because it's not something that I have read much of, and I just loved everything about this book, and I can't wait to continue on. And if you are into historical fiction, you really, really do not want to miss The Wolf Den. Then I need to mention, these are audiobooks that I've listened to. So I started listening to Golden Sun and I got up to Dark Age. So I need to listen to Lightbringer, but it wasn't on Scribd. Although now Scribd is called Everard, something of the sort. So they changed their name. But anyway, I listened to this old series on Scribd. I had previously listened to Red Rising and never continue on, because again, I think it's kind of like a known fact that Red Rising is the weakest part of a series, and then it kind of changes dramatically from book number 2, and then I started listening to book number 2 just because I was curious. Everybody kept saying, keep going with this epic sci-fi saga, and so I did. And now we are at the end of a year where I've listened to probably 100 hours of this story, because every book is at least 30 hours long, and I kind of listen to like 2 times speed. So we know that this is an epic sci-fi saga, and for someone who does not appreciate the sci-fi genre as of now, as many of you probably guys do, I'm still relatively new and I don't particularly love when it's too scientific. It never appealed to me too much. Also, if you hear any shouting, it's my child having a blast in her room playing with her Barbies. Anyway, so I was saying, like, you know, sci-fi, it's been a hit and a miss, mostly a miss for me in the last few years. This saga really made me understand that I just need to find the right sci-fi to listen to or read. What I really liked of these is, first of all, the complete turn that we have from Red Rising and how big these stories become in sense of the scope of the story, what the author is doing with these. And I've got a question in my mind, but I don't know, probably I am wrong, but I have read the history of Rome and how, you know, it became from, you know, you got a king, you got a republic, and then you got the emperor, the August. And so I was wondering if it's following a similar pattern or not. Anyway, I am fascinated by history and I see a lot of things they took also from the Roman Empire translated into this kind of sci-fi epic saga, and I think it's from the writing, the characters, the arc of the characters, and also how it does not shy away from killing our darling sometimes, and you know how grim, dark and horrific it is at times, how it portrays war in a way that it's very distressing. I think this saga gave me a lot of emotions, and because of the emotions, like, you know, usually books that make it into my favorite of the year is because they carried with them weight that I felt in terms of how emotional I was toward these books. And Red Rising saga from book 2 onward has definitely took me on a ride, on a roller coaster of emotions and all the twists that happened, and I will have to genuinely appreciate how skillful the author has been in creating this masterpiece. A novella I want to mention because then it sparked my love for medieval horror is Hellmouth. This is a very, probably was around 2 hours, 3 hours long novella. I've listened to this at the beginning of the year on Scribd. I just call it Scribd because I can never say the right name for the new app they kind of put out. And this is about this bunch of mercenaries that are given a task of going in this town where something dreadful has happened and they know it and they need to go there and kind of on a quest. And it pretty soon turns violent and horrific. This is a novella, something that usually I do not reach out for much because I do like my novels to have more meat on it. So I took this as an introduction to the genre to see if I was into medieval horror. I had a feeling that I would be, and as soon as I finished this novella I went and researched a whole hour online to find any medieval horror that was any good out there. I did find it and I'm gonna mention it in a second, but I am grateful to this novella to just kind of consolidate the idea that yes, medieval horror is my jam and I could absolutely love it. And I think also for the amount of space that you're given in a novella like this, it felt like a very chunky novella. It felt complete. Yes, I would have loved to read a whole novel with these characters in it, and I hope he will think about writing more medieval horror, but it didn't feel lacking in a sense. It felt entertaining. I couldn't stop listening. I listened in one go, and yeah, I would definitely recommend. And it's also a good entry point to realize if you are into the genre, it's something that you might, you know, find yourself actually enjoying and checking out more in the future, or if you don't like it. It is pretty high quality, so you've got, you know, it's good to start with high quality novella to see if you might enjoy the genre. But yeah, I said that if you enjoy the genre, if you say like, well, actually medieval horror is not too bad, then I can suggest to you to read my other favorite book of the year that it's in the same genre, so medieval horror, and this is Between Two Fires, and this is actually a book that I can hold up to. So this is a standalone horror. Of course, it's also fantasy because, you know, there are demons and creatures, and it's a horror that takes place, it's inspirational by Catholicism and Christianity. So in this world, you got this mercenary who used to be a knight and now is a mercenary. And he kind of come across the path of this girl. This girl, she's very young and she's got this kind of divination powers where she can see potentially the future. She knows that she has to do certain things in order to save the world from this demoniac invasion. So this takes place in France, where there is a plague that has decimated the population, and on top of everything else there are demons roaming the earth. So this mercenary finds this girl, first series of events. And then they team up with also a priest, who is a priest that has a lot to amend for, and they go on this journey to try and carry this girl to this sacred town, so this holy town where she's got this mission, and she knows that if she goes there she can try and fix the situation and this kind of stop this war between, you know, hell and heaven that's happening on earth. And it's just his prose, man, like the way he writes these, the way this is packed with monsters. I'm not a religious person, but I did find out first of all by reading Preacher, the comic, to be fair, that I really enjoy when actually religion is taken and destroyed, basically made into something that, you know, you can see it in the genre of horror. Now, if you're particularly sensible and you're particularly religious and you don't like when, you know, things are being taken that wrong turn, don't read this, because this is absolutely full of horrific stuff. I got a couple of scenes stuck in my head, and they are there, as the people say these days, they are living there rent-free. So I thought one thing that really stood out, apart from the entertaining plot that we got on, is his writing, his prose, and how these characters' dialogues were constructed. Just had a blast. And I know that he wrote a fantasy series, and I'm gonna get my hands on that fantasy series because I had heard amazing things about it in 2024 for sure. Another one I do not have because I listened to on audiobook is Monday is Not Coming. So this actually is a YA contemporary story. And I reached out to this because, first of all the praises I had read, but also I had listened to other Tiffany D. Jackson books before and really enjoyed them. However, hands down, this is my favorite book by her. And if I was to rank this list by any chance, I'm not, but if I was to, this would be very, very up high. In a nutshell, this is the story of this girl. She's a bit of an outcast, and the only person that she really connects to, that she really spends the most of her time with, is her best friend Monday. Monday, though, one day goes missing. So you kind of follow our main protagonist trying to put the pieces together, or what happened to Monday, where is she? And what the author does, it takes you on this ride, and all of a sudden, toward, you know, 3/4 in, almost to the end, it tells you what happened. And I remember I was washing the dishes while listening to this, and I had to stop and go back and listen again. I left everything there and I just said, that was bloody genius, woman. That was I don't want to spoil anything, but that was revolutionary for the story. Like, something happens and you're just like, oh, this is not what I thought it was for all of this time. So I listened to these, thinking, okay, these are very solid 4 stars, and then that happened, and I looked back at everything I've been through a story, and it was just like, oh my god, like, the way she crafted these was so perfect. I was genuinely impressed by this book. I was genuinely impressed, and at the same time I was genuinely also appreciating of what the author was trying to display in this. And again, it's very difficult not to give any, I don't want to spoil anything, because I think this genuinely is a book that you should just go in without knowing much about the plot and just enjoy the ride. I'm gonna say these, I really loved the themes that she explores in these. And I think these are themes that not many contemporary have explored in the way she does on that side of things, and the way she also crafted all together and sent the message all together and creates this kind of tension throughout this book was just perfect. Monday's Not Coming is like kind of a hype that I think it's very well deserved. Another book that it's up there. So I'm not gonna attempt to climb and die. The Ninth Rain. Now, The Ninth Rain is the start of a new trilogy. It's a epic high fantasy, and you follow 3 main protagonists that all are part of different races. One is this kind of, I imagine them a bit like avatar creatures, one of them. Another one is she's a witch, and the final one, she's a woman, middle-aged woman, who is she's very much into antique and history. In this world that's been created by the author, the races are trying to kind of live alongside each other more or less successfully, because what kind of really makes them work together at times is the fact that this alien enemy come every 30 years and try to destroy the world and kind of conquer everything. And the avatar-like version, like creatures, they are the one they usually defend, and they are usually the ones that are the most equipped to kind of defend Earth against these alien invasions that happen. It's not sci-fi, but you know that these creatures are not part of this world. And now though this race has lost their powers that can help them defeat this alien enemy that we will know they might come back eventually. So there is like a high stakes now here, because if alien comes back, I'm gonna call them alien, but if they come back, this race doesn't have the tools anymore to defeat them. So there is this kind of race against time of finding out who actually these aliens are, what are they made of, where they come from, what is their history, do we have any weak point that we can use in case they come back, otherwise we are screwed, basically. And so they team up and they go on this quest of finding out more about the enemies and themselves and their own races to try and be ready when another invasion happens. And I found the part of quest of this book, this part of let's find out about our enemy, let's find out about their lore, how they're built, where they come from and everything. That exploration part that takes place kind of, you know, these characters go on this journey of putting the pieces together, so fascinating and so compelling to read. The characters really came through the pages. I was really rooting for them, and I really enjoyed the first book. I found that it was just a perfection. I just couldn't put it down. I generally was eager to know and eager to find out, and some of the best fantasies I've ever read in my life is when I couldn't put the book down because I needed to know what happens next. So these are fantasy that takes the high fantasy kind of premise and makes it into something unique. I said that I do own most of his books, and I do own most of his books, but they're not in my hands or reachable at this moment, and I'm just lazy. I don't want to get out of this chair. So I'm gonna put another picture for Broken Bonds. This is erotica fantasy. I'm just gonna say it's definitely not everybody's gem, and I would say if you're not into spicy romance, fantasy romance, don't even attempt this, because this is a reverse harem. I mean, the first book, which is personally my favorite one, in the sense that it's the book that I loved all five of the six books that are in the series, but the first book is the first one I've read this year, and it's the one that I couldn't just put it down, and kind of ignited again my love for romantic fantasy. And you know, I also find that I really love, just in my books, I want to premise, reverse harem. I was saying this is a 6 books series. It's a fantasy series. The fantasy element, it's very poor. Okay, so the part that actually has to do with, you know, there is this big enemy, we have to defeat it. It's very repetitive. Don't go into this if you want to have a good plot on that side, because it does not generally have much. There's not much meat on the bone of the fantasy plot, okay? But this is the story of Ollivander, it's not from Harry Potter, Oleander. Oleander is this young girl. I think she is in her late teens, so 19, 18, something of the sort when the book starts, and she's been on the run for a bunch of years because her parents died in an accident, and she has to go on a run because she has powers that she does not want to enhance. And the way this world works is that there are normal humans, but then there are some people that have powers that will be enhanced once they mate, and usually they have different mates. These mates are found through a blood test, so they're like predestined mates, and Oleander has 5 of them, and she is terrified of her own power. You know this from the beginning, and so she knows that if she goes and mate with 5 of them, her powers will completely go out of control, so she can't have that. She can't risk to destroy the world. The problem being though is that these mates of hers, they're quite stubborn, they're quite powerful, some of them, and they have a lot of money, so eventually they do manage to track her down, and they force her to attend an academy with people like them, so people that have these kind of powers. And in the first book she doesn't want to anything with them, she can't stand them, and there is this hate relationship where she's trying to get away from them and she can't get away from them, and they can't stand each other although they're supposed to be mate. Now, it's just so entertaining. It's there is a problematic scene. Just look out for trigger warnings for the first book. It just happens once in the first book and never again. Doesn't justify the fact that there is like a scene that a lot of people might find actually very triggering, problematic. So just be aware of that. Look out for trigger warnings. This is a series that I would suggest only if you're really into romantic fantasy, erotic fantasy, and if you like reverse harem stories, because that's what it is. Their hate-to-hate relationship I was mentioning, the way she's got a mouth on herself. She's very strong in the first book. She's very like opinionated in the first book. I really liked how she approaches them, and I found it hilarious. I had some very good laughs, and I really felt that tension coming through. I really wanted things to change, and so yeah, I love this series. I binge read this series in 2 weeks in summer. Couldn't put it down, and I don't remember the last time I actually spent an annual leave doing my job just binge reading a series. Finally, a series I can hold in my hand, World of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. This is a series that needs no introduction, and this is a second book in this. I don't know how long it's gonna be, this series by Sanderson, and it's a epic high fantasy. Now, in England they divide them into, and I don't know why, they probably just want more money, I don't know, or what. And so part 1 I really enjoyed, but it was okay, for 4.5 solid stars. But what made these into, make into the favorite of the year is part 2. So the latter part of World of Radiance. I think when I was reading these, I was just blown away by, how again he had crafted this plot. And it's the same that happened in The Way of Kings, while the end hits you so hard, like the stakes, the way the tension has been built, and now we are here, it's happening. I need these characters to be okay. I think I absolutely love these characters, and I really liked how, because it's such a epic series, you could have 1 million characters, and I'm okay with that usually, because Game of Thrones, favorite book ever, so I am okay with 1 million characters. But in this case we got four characters. I can think of 5 characters that are like, no, four of them that are really the main characters of a series, and I genuinely care so much about them, and therefore I am so tense every time I get to the latter part of the book when things happen, and the stakes become higher and higher and higher, and I'm in awe by this series, as many of us are. I'll be really honest, I've read The Hero of Ages, Final Empire, The Wall of Ascension, and I really enjoyed those, but I wasn't like, I never thought, Sanderson is one of my favorite authors, so I need to read his books all the time. But this series is a series that I think is gonna become, greatest of all time, together with my other fantasy series, if it keeps going as it is. So absolutely in love with World of Radiance. I love this. Divine Rivals. This year, surprisingly, I don't know, maybe it was my mood, but I have a few romances thrown into, my favorite ones. It's not contemporary romance, fantasy romance, but I really find myself loving a few of those, and Divine Rivals is one of them. Now, this is both YA if you want, and adult. It's, I think it's open to all audience. There is no like spicy times or anything. This was such a darling love story. It takes place in this fantasy world where it's basically this kind of World War II situation. It's not our war though, it's not World War II, and it's this kind of war between 2 gods, so 2 factions of people that serve different gods, and they're at war with each other. And our main protagonist, she becomes a journalist, and because her brother goes missing on the battlefield, she decides to go and become a war journalist. Then her arch enemy, who used to kind of work at the same journal, and they used to have this kind of rivalry of who was the best journalist, he also ends up going. I don't want to spoil anything. And it's their story, but it's done such in a sweet, slow, non-tropey way that I was genuinely surprised from the prose, but honestly how she can make this romance made of this kind of small tender moments between them. It really came through the pages. I really cared about them first of all, and therefore then them together. Generally impressed by this. Such a good fantasy romance book. Now, since I've mentioned romantic fantasy, I probably can mention the other romantic fantasy and the last one I do have, I believe, and this is The Hurricane Wars. Very recent read. Absolutely impressed by this. Sold as an adult. It's actually here. I can actually take it out for once and can show it to you. This is a beautiful Fairlight edition. Can we appreciate the pages of this? Anyway, this is an epic high fantasy. I would say that although the world building is there, I believe that either she's gonna do it slowly throughout the books, or it's never gonna be the strongest part of this. I think when it comes down to this kind of romantic fantasy, you have to be into the romance. Otherwise, the fantasy part, again, there is a bit more meat on the bones, definitely, than, you know, the Broken Bond times. There's just definitely much more about the world building and the history of this world. But again, the fantasy plot, it's not the main scope of the story. I think it's used, the world building is used to make us cherish this romance even more, or this potential romance, because at the moment it's not very much a romance at all. You follow these two people. He is the heir of the emperor who's doing all the conquering around. So this kind of kingdom, they use shadow magic to conquer other kingdoms around them. And our female protagonist, she works for the army of a kingdom that's trying to defend itself from being conquered. And she is a special member of the army because she has got light magic. So she can control the sunlight or light in general, I don't remember exactly. And she's the only one that kind of repel shadow magic. So one time they're on the battlefield, by chance they meet, and their magic, rather than kind of destroy each other, they combine. So the magic combines, and then the story kind of goes from there, because this is very much enemies to still enemies that are forced together and have to kind of collaborate at one point for whatever reason story. And I think, again, this is the way the romance is done. It's a romance that's taking its time, very much still in, you know, the very first stages by the time you finish this book, but it's done using like small but very well crafted moments between them. They are not vulgar, they are very tender, and they're so subtle at times, where you have to read and, you know, it might be a glance, it might be like a very small touch, and the way she's crafting it, the way she's creating the tension between these two characters really worked well for me. I was really in the mood for something like this, and I found it so, I don't know, so well done, because it's so new to have a romance. Maybe I've read too many YA where, you know, the romance in YA sometimes is rushed, it's not developed well, and sometimes these people are there just because they are hot, and so therefore they have to be together. But this, it's giving me more to it. I'm just saying, you know, these are people that have their own characters, and I can cherish their own personalities, therefore then I will love them the more together. But it's a way that these and Divine Rivals, the way the romance has been developed, it's refreshing for the genre. It doesn't feel without any motive. It feels like there is genuine character building first of all, and the romance building there. So yeah, love the Hurricane Wars. Let's see how this continues on. And also, let me say this before I move on to the next book. Her writing, this is a debut novel, and she's already using such a nice prose and such a way of describing things and carrying forward this story with just your skillful writing. I am genuinely impressed, especially because, again, this is a debut novel, and so kudos to the author. One of the best reads of the year. So got 3 more to go. Before I do go on though, I want to do an honorable mention. The reason why this is not a 13th book in this list is because I genuinely loved this book because of one sentence. Now, you might know this about me, or you might not if you're new, but I used to work in domestic violence services. And as someone who worked there, I am very familiar with the circle of abuse. And I have to mention this book, which is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I read her sporadically, never been the biggest fan of her. I liked her writing enough, but I'm not into romance, therefore I don't reach out for, you know, out to her books much. But then I remember when I was doing the other job, someone mentioned this book and just told me, just go and read it and you'll find out why we, you know, we cherish the way we do. And I get toward the end, and there is that sentence that kind of really hit me in the chest, because this is the story of this woman who finds herself in a domestic violent relationship, basically. And the end of this book, she at one point says something to someone, I can't spoil anything, and that made me, I don't know, it really made me look back at the cycle of abuse and looked at how that sentence broke that cycle in such a simple way and yet powerful way that this book will stuck with me probably forever, just because of that one sentence and the power that it carries. I understand that this is a power that I feel particularly because of my involvement with, domestic violence. I want to mention it because it stuck with me. I read this months and months ago, and every time my eyes roam through my bookshelf and I look at this book, that sentence pops in my mind and I'm just like, yes. I know that it's just a book, it's fictional, but I just genuinely believe that if this could be true, if this sentence, if this ideology that the character has, if everybody could get to that point, and have the same privilege that this woman has, because I do recognize that, this is a domestic violence situation where people still have the money to make choices, and that's not how, unfortunately, a lot of times things work in the real life. But that sentence still carries weight, still carries power, despite me recognizing, that this protagonist Ed means that other people living actually through this, not in a fictional world, but in real world, they don't have. Yet it doesn't take away. The fictional side of things doesn't take away the power of that sentence. Loved this. Loved this book because of that. So I've got 2 more books to go, actually. Now that I looked down, it was 2 books because I already mentioned one of the 2 horrors, which was Between Two Fires. But the other horror that made into my favorite of the year is No One Gets Out Alive. Deeply, deeply impressed by this book. This is the story of Stephanie, this girl who's very much down her luck. She is finding hard to find jobs after she left her stepmother's house. So she moves to Birmingham because she's got a job coming up. And she rents this room in this Victorian dilapidated house for very, very cheap. And she doesn't have much of a choice. That's the only thing she can afford. And so she moves in, and soon she finds out that the people who are renting this house to her are extremely disturbing and potentially malevolent. And she starts hearing women crying and weeping noises and very weird stuff happening during nighttime. And unfortunately, because of her financial means, she's stuck there and she has to kind of deal with the consequences. And as the title says, no one gets out alive. Now, this story is a massive story. The latter part, the ending, is not the strongest part. I think there is a part that takes place when you start the story, and there is a latter part that happens a few years after. And I say that it's the weakest part. However, I was so impressed by the first 3/4 of this story that I had to put this book on this list. First of all, it's writing. Again, this year, theme of the year, beautiful writing. Like, all the books are made into my, favorite of the year, apart from Broken Bonds, which I can't generally praise too much with the prose. It was funny and entertaining, but prose-wise, I can't say it was one of the best things. But all the other things that made it into my favorite of the year, I had very, very impressive prose. I was very impressed with the writing, and especially when you write a horror where majority of people would just focus on trying to make you shit your pants. This man managed to scare the living out of me, but also managed to do it using beautiful prose. And it reminded me a bit of like when I read Intensity last year by Dean Koontz, and it was just like, how can you have such a nice prose in such a horrific story? And the combo of the two works perfectly well. This is full of violence, and again, this is a horror, so I feel no need almost to say look out for trigger warnings, because it's a horror book. It's full of violence against women, so every time I mention a book that's usually horror, I tend to read pretty violent fiction, especially when it comes down to horror or thrillers. So it comes with it. Just look out for trigger warnings. If you read some scenes at the beginning and you're just like, nope, it's not for me, push it down, it gets worse. So don't push yourself through this. For me, this was a shocking horror, a horror that really make me shake in my boots. and it did it with a perfect prose. The tension, it's a slow one, it builds up on it, and so when it hits you even stronger because you're being tense for now pages and pages and pages. And I really noticed that for me slow horror works well. Impressed by him. I want to check out more by the author. I don't think I can do the movie though, because I think it's going to be too graphic and scary. So let me know if a movie is particularly scary, because having read the book, I am scared of watching the movie. I found the visual format for me of horror is just too much. I don't watch horror movies in general. I'm getting more into them, but I don't like this kind of violence. Probably I wouldn't be able to handle on screen. The last one, the last book I want to mention today, and again, this would be very, very, very high up, if not probably around the first place. If you ask me favorite of the year, it's actually literature fiction, and this year will have to be As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. This is the stunning edition by Fairy Loot, and this is a story about this girl, young girl living in Syria, and she is working in the hospital during the war. So she's trying to save lives, you know, where war is raging all around her, and she's trying also, she's kind of debating if she should leave the country with her best friend Lila, who is pregnant, and she is married to her brother, so to the brother of our main protagonist. Her brother now is not around anymore, and so she's kind of, you know, she feels the burden of wanting to stay in her country and do the best as she can to save lives, but at the same time she feels the responsibility of taking care of her best friend and, you know, the upcoming baby. And this was devastating. Again, a debut novel with beautiful prose, and someone who's lived in Italy for the first 20 years of her life, and it's kind of grown up with, you know, on the news every other day, hearing about, you know, immigrants trying to make it, trying to cross and come to Italy for refuge, and the struggle that they would have to go through. And, you know, having to witness also, like, you know, how people are against it and pro it, and, you know, all the political debate around it, and how gut-wrenching is, you know, the amount of people that lose their life. Toward the end of these, I was just ugly crying. Like, this is the only book, I believe, that made me ugly crying. This is also a book that kind of took me through all the emotions, kind of a whole spectrum of emotions. I went through all of them, but it's the only book that really had me ugly crying to a point that I had to leave it down, I had to take deep breaths and then continue on. And I think the author, she's a big fan of a member of the BTS boy band, and she just wanted him to read the book. And I was like, if I ever, by any chance, I will never, but if I ever meet him, the first thing I would tell him, that man, is, I've got a book for you, you have to read it. I just generally hope for her that she gets her wishes. I really generally cared for the author as well. She just kind of writes in the back. I've read an interview by her or something of the sort, explaining, you know, the inspiration, and she's from Syria, and, you know, what kind of led her to write these. And I was just so touched by her as an author, and I was again so deeply touched by everything in it. There is an element of romance, which again is so sweet and so well done. Everything is perfection about this book. Also, like, the best cry I had all year long. So this is my book pick for my book club. So I proposed this book, and it was voted, and we read it, and we had a massive 3 hours conversation after. So it also sparked so much connection between people in my real life, just talking about how much we cherished and love this book. So it has a special place in my heart, and I'm so glad I read it. And again, I wouldn't say, you know, if you pick one book from this list, pick these, because it depends on, you know, the genre that you love. I generally think a book like this should be read by anybody, despite the genre that you tend to read. It has something for everyone, just how much, you know, you can also learn about a reality, something that is happening. But every single book in this list was so dear to me. In this year, there's been, on a side, so stressful. I've done a video about, I'm talking about 2023, of course, and I've done a video explaining why I've been so busy. And so if you watch that, it's linked down below, kind of like on my reading plan for 2024. I've carried a lot of stress and anxiety with me throughout the year, and these books really gave me a safe space, a space where I would just breathe and enjoy my favorite hobby ever, which is reading. And so they provided me that respite that I so much needed. So I'm so grateful for each one of these books on this list, and I would strongly suggest all of them to you guys. Let me know your favorite reads of the year. Let's see what happens in 2024. But yeah, amazing reading year on that sense. I had very good reading year overall. And stay tuned, I will do my most disappointing and worst books of the year later in the month. But I'm genuinely curious, what was your favorite reads of the year? Because I need to put those on my TBR probably. And as you can see, I read most genre, so whatever genre they sit in, please let me know. I probably would be interested in checking them out. If you're new, I would love for you to subscribe and be part of a small community, and let's chat in the comments down below. I'll see you next time. Take care of yourself. Ciao!